There was a wrongness to the air the first night I noticed it. Not the cinematic wrongness of thunderheads or sirens, but a humid silence that pressed at the teeth of the town. Streetlights hummed on a frequency that made glass vibrate like a throat clearing. Dogs turned their heads at nothing and kept looking. The river carried a faint metallic trace, as if something deep had been rinsed and left to dry in the open. At first, the signs were small and oddly domestic. Compasses wavered. Radio static resolved into patterns that were almost speech. Shadows on plaster fell a fraction at a time with their sources. People began to recount dreams of latticed skies and corridors that opened like mouths. I cataloged them the way a naturalist counts beetles. Naming seemed to narrow the thing. The more I named, the more the town supplied evidence in patient increments. Footprints that crossed a lawn and stepped through a puddle without disturbing it. A humold smell that surfaced in laundry and on the backs of chairs. Neighbors started speaking in parentheses, as if afraid to let a sentence finish. The edges of my nights softened. I woke with the impression someone had stood very close and had looked at me with an attention that made my skin insolvent. Papers shifted on the table, though windows were shut. Friends began to avoid mirrors. I found strings of symbols scratched almost tenderly into wood, notes left by a hand that did not want to bruise the surface. When I tried to tell myself a reasonable story, animal, prank, sleep disorder, the rational scaffolding bent, possibilities slid under my fingers like wet stones. Sleep became a negotiation. Waking, an act of will. One evening, the sky simply folded. It was not thunder or cloud. It was a slow, deliberate creasing, a geometry tightening above the town. Lights elongated into filaments and drew themselves into a lattice I recognized from the dreams. The air brought a chorus of low, pure tones that seemed to live not in the ears but behind the eyes. In lamplight, a shape resolved, not an organism in our sense, but a topology of angles suggesting intention, an intelligence distributed through space like a constellation of gnats. It did not so much approach as reveal itself, as if a map had been set down and the map looked back. I tried to resist, to record, to speak, to sleep. The more I resisted, the more the town rearranged its furniture and people into patterns that fit the lattice. My thoughts echoed in unfamiliar keys. Memory began to fold. I discovered names could be unwound, affection translated into coordinates. Contact was less a meeting than a misreading of scale. I had been a margin in a book, and something had started to read me aloud. In the end, there was no grand entrance, only a quiet redistribution. Windows reflected not rooms but a depthless field, faces blurred into maps. I felt finality in the way the light chose to stay, and hunger in the way the sky waited. The town learned a new grammar, and I kept listening, a margin still turning, knowing with a clarity that frightened me that chapters can be closed and pages can be lifted.